People were dying, young and old. Of course, when we crossed the border into Uganda, there was no humanitarian assistance at the beginning. We did not have food or water or shelter for a number of days before we were moved from the border into the refugee settlement. So we slept in churches, in schools, in the Ugandan communities. So the situation was not good at all. I did not expect to see what I saw at my age.
Joining me this week is Ntakamaze Nziyonvira, the CEO of CIYOTA, an international youth organization empowering young people in Uganda. TK fled the DRC with his family, aged just 11, to escape a brutal war that was raging around them. Crossing into Uganda, he became a refugee, sleeping in churches and schools in local communities before landing in a settlement. Life was very challenging, he says, but we had to accept this was our home. As a child, there was no motivation to go to school, but he persevered because of his father. He won scholarships to local schools in Uganda and then to university in the US. According to the UN, there are more than 36 million refugees worldwide. The biggest challenge is to give someone hope, TK tells me, to build capacity, knowledge, and skills. If you have these tools, you can contribute to the development of any country. Street Child works closely with local organizations, including refugee-led charities like CIYOTA, to create sustainable and effective solutions to an increasing number of global challenges. In the lead up to the Global Refugee Forum taking place this December, the world's largest gathering of refugees and their hosts, this conversation highlights the people behind the statistics. Many people see refugees as dependents, TK says, but refugees have skills and abilities. What they don't have are opportunities. Welcome to the podcast, Ntakamaze Nziyonvira.
Thank you.
You were born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where you lived until you were 11 years old. When war broke out, you fled with your parents and your brothers and sisters into Uganda. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Thank you. I left the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 1998 December. I was 11 years. So from 1996 to date, the Democratic Republic of the Congo has been at war. And it is also believed to have lost over 6 million people since that time. So I left the country alongside with my parents and the thousands of other Congolese. We flew to Uganda, where we were finding peace.
How far was your home from the border of Uganda? How far did you have to go to flee?
I actually lived not very far from the Uganda-Congo border. So my home village was about 15 kilometers away from the border.
And you were under fire at the time?
Yes, at that time when we left, we were under fire. We were running away to save ourselves.
Do you remember what it was like when you were, obviously you were quite young, but you have memories of that moment?
Yes, I still have a picture of what happened because people were running up and down. I remember we left without anything. We couldn't pick our clothes, or if maybe we were thinking about a document like a birth certificate or a school certificate, we did not think about that. We just left. At first we ran into the bush because we didn't know where to go. And then with time, we forced ourselves to cross the border into Uganda, where it was safe. So people were dying, young and old. Of course, when we crossed the border into Uganda, there was no humanitarian assistance at the beginning. We did not have food or water or shelter for a number of days before we were moved from the border into the refugee settlement. So we slept in churches, in schools, in the Ugandan communities. So the situation was not good at all. I did not expect to see what I saw at my age. It was really confusing. Every time I asked my dad what was going on, he did not have like a better way to tell me what we were going through, because we thought it was going to end soon. That was the response I got.
You weren't alone with your parents. You have brothers and sisters.
Yes, when I crossed the border, I had 6 other siblings. I'm the firstborn. Yeah, so I was along with my other siblings.
It must have been terrifying for you, but also incredibly difficult for your parents with 7 children, trying to keep them safe.
Yes, we wanted to be safe, and like you have said, crossing the border with the 7 children, it was really quite hard. And my family was not the only family going through that experience. Thousands of families were struggling to carry kids. I remember my youngest sister, she was sick. We had other younger kids who needed to be carried. People were supposed to run faster to save themselves. So some of the older kids used to carry others to make sure that movement was possible, especially to cross the border into Uganda.
How long did it take you to get to the settlement that you ended up in, the refugee settlement? Did you know you were going there, or was it word of mouth along the way that there was a refugee, a place for you to get to have some assistance?
So I did not know that we would end up in a refugee settlement. So when we crossed the border of Congo and Uganda into Uganda, we lived in one of the Catholic churches for over a week because the Ugandan leaders used to come and tell us that humanitarian assistance would come. We had lost hope because we did not have latrines or toilets. So the area where we lived, it was overcrowded with the refugees. We had no food. And so it took over a week before UNHCR and other officials, I think it was UNHCR and the Red Cross who came first, they talked about planning to move us from that area into the interior of Uganda. So when we were moved from the border of Uganda into the refugee settlement, they brought the trucks. Those were trucks which they were not buses, so we did not sit comfortably. We were packed in there. I remember we had some old woman and a man who were our neighbor in the refugee camp settlement. When we arrived in the refugee settlement, they spent a few days and died because the congestion we were in the trucks was not really good for them, and some of the pregnant mothers were not really comfortable. So I did not expect to end in the refugee settlement. I thought we were going somewhere safer for a short time, but not in the refugee settlement.
So when you arrived there, do you remember your first impressions?
Yes, it was a lot of panic. First of all, like I said, I thought that we were going to stay in Uganda for like a week or a month and then go back to our home. I never imagined that we were losing our home for a number of years. So we were packed in a school. That is where we found shelter. They prepared the porridge for us, and they also prepared some beans and ugali, which is a maize flour paste that you prepare and eat it with beans. So we ate, but with also questions of where next. So after some days, my dad and other men among the refugees were told to go and get a piece of land. That was a plot where we would put our small house to begin with from that time on, to live in Kyangwale refugee settlement.
Right. So is that generally how it works then when you arrive in the camp, in the settlement, you choose where you want to be placed, or obviously you did then, but normally you're given a plot of land or you choose it? Is that how it works?
The Ugandan government has a way they manage settlements. So refugee settlements are made in such a way that refugees are given a piece of land. In between, households, there is a road. Now, on the other sides of the roads, the government allocates each household a piece of land. For example, in Kyangwale refugee settlement where I live, they gave us 30 meters by 60, a plot of 30 meters by 60. It means after 30 meters, you have a neighbor. And the refugee settlement is organized in terms of villages. So we have a number of villages, and each village is also comprised of a number of blocks. Those blocks also are comprised of a number of households. So in terms of leadership, you have the government forming villages, and then each village has a number of blocks, and those blocks, in our block there were 24 households. So, and whether you are 10 or 2 or 1, you are given that piece of land, 30 meters by 60. And with time, because we had to do farming before the number of refugees increased, the government of Uganda had to allocate us more land away from our plots. It was a farmland where we could plant maize and beans or rice for both family consumption and for sale, so that we do not depend on the humanitarian assistance like World Food Program. But that was when we arrived.
Gosh, that's really interesting. I had no idea. It's quite organized.
Yes, it is quite organized, and I think I like it better compared to the refugee camp where you have thousands of people given tents, and then they erect their tents closer to each other. They have a common latrine, pit of latrine, where people go to ease themselves. So in situations of refugee camps, you have cholera or dysentery compared to the situations we have been put in Uganda. So I'm not saying we have never had cholera outbreaks. We did have cholera outbreaks at the beginning when people did not have pit latrines, but it was manageable because we were not close to each other.
Once you accepted that you were not going to leave the camp, you yourself, tell me a little bit about the life in a refugee settlement.
Accepting that the refugee settlement was my home, it was quite difficult because I thought that we were not going to stay there for a long time. So finally we had to accept that was our new home. So we started building on the piece of land that the government had allocated to us. And we also began to clear the bush that was around our house to make sure that we settled there. So we were isolated from the Ugandan community because the refugee settlement which was given to us was not occupied by the Ugandan community. So we did not know that there were other people who lived in the outskirts of the refugee settlement. So we did not have access to seeds, but later when some people started moving out of the refugee settlement, they met Ugandans who also spoke different languages from us. So we acquired some seeds and other things like cassava stems, beans. We started planting and growing our own food. So access to thinking about school, it wasn't a priority for us because the immediate problem was, how do we get food? How do we get water? How do we get access to health care? I know UNHCR and other implementing partners of UNHCR tried to support us in many areas, but at that time we did not have enough schools in the refugee settlement. I remember there were only 2 primary schools and 1 secondary school that was at the extreme end of the refugee camp. So if you wanted to go to school, you needed to speak English. We were from a French-speaking country, so we had language barrier. And as children who were from French-speaking countries, we did not see the importance of speaking English, because every time we thought that if we went back home, where shall we use English in offices? So it's kind of not making sense because English.
But you still had that thought in your head that you were going home.
Yes.
You know?
So our parents kept on encouraging us to walk long distances from our new homes to school, but it was quite hard. There were no food, enough food at home, so we did not eat breakfast. It was like lunch shared together as a family and dinner or supper. If you were not around, it means you missed it. So as a child, there was no big motivation to like walk that long distance to schools which did not have even enough desks. So many children who were desperate were attending classes, teachers who were also not motivated. So it was quite difficult. And when you look at on the side of health, we also had very few clinics within the refugee settlements. Also, the level of the capacity they had to support the number of refugees in the settlement, it wasn't really good. We had no clean roads for the ambulance to like come to pick or drop anyone who was sick or even someone who died, because I remember at the beginning so many people suffered from malaria. We had so many mosquitoes, it was a bush, no clean water. We had I remember the borehole where we went to draw water, it was also a long distance. So life was very challenging, but we had to accept this as our home.
Talk to me about the schools. You've mentioned that the schools were very far from where you were. What was the motivation in the end? Because you've done incredibly well with your education over the years. You obviously are incredibly smart. You were very good at school. What clicked eventually to encourage you to go to school, especially with the language barrier? Because that's huge, especially when you're so young.
Yes, so I was lucky to be among the people who did not drop out. So my biggest motivation comes from my dad, who always said, you have to be in school. This is the only way you can be able to empower yourself, because many children dropped out. I kept going despite the fact that there were so many challenges. And finally, I had to finish primary school and went to secondary school.
What things did you learn at secondary school? Did you do math? You did reading? Were there other subjects also, or was it very limited?
There were a number of subjects. Actually, I was among the few refugees who acquired the scholarship from Window Trust International, the Uganda program. In 2003, I was given a scholarship to study in town, outside the refugee camp, about 70, 80 kilometers away from the refugee settlement. So there were a number of subjects. We did mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, history. I remember that time we even had political science.
Wow.
And I also did some music, home management, woodwork. So it was
a huge difference from the camp schools, from the settlement.
Far different. Yeah. So
how did you get the scholarship in the first place?
So the UNHCR provided a number of scholarships through its implementing partners. At that time, it happened to be Window Trust International, and even today they still partner to provide access to education to university. But at that time, we were getting secondary school scholarships. They were very few, but I was among the top students from the primary school who benefited from that scholarship.
So you were boarding in the secondary school that you went to that was outside of the settlement?
Yes. So I went into a boarding school which was away from the refugee settlement. So I came back home after the end of the term, which was 3 months. So 3 times in a year, I was in the refugee settlement. The rest of the time, I was in school.
In school. And talk to me about your experience in the school. You said before that it was, there was definitely stigma surrounding you coming from a refugee settlement.
Yes, at the beginning, my experience and other refugees' experience was really very harsh, because even Ugandan students did not understand who a refugee is. So we had to be defined in a negative way. So first of all, we were like intruders, people who had just come in to like eat their food, or even sleep in their dormitory, even occupy their classrooms. So even when the classroom was enough, some people still reacted differently, because once we were known that we were refugees, they thought we were not meant to be there. So living with that stigma every day, you are going to serve food. If you are lining up, you maybe happen to like touch someone's body, they say, oh, go away, you're a refugee. Even if they don't mean it in a negative way, the moment they mention, go away, you refugee, you feel bad. So my experience, it wasn't good in that sense. Of course, we were getting food, we were sleeping in the dormitories. There was bullying in school at that time, not only for refugees, but for every new student who came. But for us who did not have many older students who were friends or maybe from our communities, we did not have enough protection from fellow students. With time, after like 3 years, we made friends with the Ugandan students, and even teachers, not only students, did not also understand who refugees were. Some of them thought that we were getting more privileges compared to the Ugandan students, because UNHCR, which was an international organization, was paying for us. I know we did not get all the support that we needed from UNHCR, and I remember UNHCR built a classroom block for the school in our name because that school was hosting refugees, but that was not enough for us like to get rid of the stigma, or maybe the school to understand that refugees were also people like them. So it took time. What we did, we had to do beyond our expectations. If we were to be in class by 8, most of us refugees were there like by 7 or 6 a.m. So in terms of academic performance, we performed extremely well because we had that pressure that if things don't go well, our name was already bad. So it was really difficult to live as a refugee. And at some point when we went outside the school, like to town, I thought it was okay maybe not to say that I'm a refugee, because it was really quite difficult to deal with the expectations of people. And sometimes you will fear that maybe you can be beaten by people who may think you are not going to like act well if they did not know you.
Yeah. I guess looking at it from an outside perspective, it was an amazing opportunity for you to have that self-motivation to get yourself out of that situation. And, you know, with what you've achieved now, which is amazing, you've come back to Uganda and you are now helping others who were in your position from the outset. Did you feel that was a motivating factor? Looking back now, do you think that was a motivating factor for you to get yourself out?
Yes. So I think it was a very big motivation. I think this is someone, maybe a singer, who said that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So that kind of experience built resilience in us. So, and of course, there are a few people who were able to stand with us after understanding our side and after seeing that we were very hardworking people. They also became a source of inspiration. And we also inspired the other people. Despite the problems we were facing, we worked hard, no complaints. So that was a big motivation for me to continue working hard. And at some point in life, I knew that this kind of education I was acquiring was going to benefit me and other people in my community.
Obviously, it's not just about luck that you were given these scholarships. Your hard work paid off, and you were able to go then to New York and study for your university degree. Tell me how that came about.
Okay, thank you. So after finishing my secondary school, I got a scholarship to study at Makerere University. I was passionate about being a medical doctor. So I remember enrolling into a veterinary medicine program. And then down the road, 1 year and a half down the road, there was no enough funding. I did drop out and applied to a scholarship program with the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program, which was attached to the African Leadership Academy in South Africa. So in 2013, I got into the University of Rochester in New York. So I changed from medicine into engineering. I did mechanical engineering because I knew my family was living in the refugee settlement. I wanted something that could quickly give me access to skills and maybe a job so that I could support my family, my dad and my siblings in the refugee camp. So 1 year before my graduation, my parents and some of my siblings were resettled to the US. So I graduated in May 2017 and went to work in Tennessee for a Japanese company called Denso Manufacturing. I worked there for 1 year, and then later I remembered that there were so many other refugees who were not having access to quality education in the refugee settlement where I lived, and in Uganda in general. So my colleague who was working at the organization that we started in 2005, the same organization that partnered with the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program at the African Leadership Academy to get me into university, I said I should go back to give back to my community. So I knew life in the US was totally different. Having moved from the refugee settlement where I did not have access to good meals, to clean water, where even my future was not determined because I didn't know when to go back. I wanted to go live again the US back to the refugee settlement. I remember some of my friends asking me if I was crazy because they thought that making such a decision wasn't for people who are not crazy. My mom herself, she cried, thinking that maybe something was wrong with me because she did not believe that someone would leave the refugee settlement to the US and then back to the refugee settlement. But I knew people who paid for my university and even secondary school did not know who I am. So the fact that people gave out of their pockets for me to be in school, I thought that it was necessary for me to go back and at least give a support to someone whose hope to go to school was not there.
And how funny that somebody, i.e. yourself, who said so many times to your father in the beginning, when are we leaving, when are we leaving, when are we leaving? And then, of course, you return to give back.
Yeah, you're right. So at that time, I had realized that the situation became protracted. So we were there longer than expected. And they say Kyangwali Refugee Settlement was formed in 1960. There were other refugees before us. We don't know when the refugee settlement will be closed because we still have more refugees coming from Congo, South Sudan. We have also refugees from Burundi and a few from Rwanda. And we are not sure which country is next in terms of instability or when these countries which are unstable will stop producing refugees. So it is quite funny to see that at first I wanted to leave the refugee settlement, but there are people who are in similar situation now who need support, or my support or other people's support. So the biggest challenge is to give someone a hope, above all building their capacity in terms of knowledge and skills, because wherever you go, if you have the capacity, the skills and the knowledge, you can be able to contribute to the development of any nation or any community. For example, refugees who have left the settlements in Uganda into the US, Canada, or other European countries, for those who have been exposed to quality education through our programs, or maybe those who have been assisted by other implementing partners of UNHCR, they have been contributing to the development of the countries which received them. And those who will go back to their countries, they will have something to do to build their nations, as compared to those who will have not been given any skill.
Let's talk about your organization a moment. So you set up your NGO It is called CIYOTA. CIYOTA. Tell me what, that's an acronym. Tell me what it means.
Yes, so CIYOTA stands for Cobras International Youth Organization to Transform Africa. And Cobras is also another acronym.
I'm going to leave that to you.
which is Congo, Burundi, Uganda, Rwanda, and Sudan. In 2005, when we saw that the problems were so many in the refugee settlement, 3 people sat down, those who were exposed to education outside the refugee settlement. They realized that there were very few students attending schools in town. So they said something has to be done. They mobilized a number of younger people to think about the solutions. I was among the few people who attended the first meetings. So we looked at the refugee settlement and the life there not being good. And we said, if this is to continue, what will be our future? So there were so many problems to deal with. We said, what is that problem we can fix such that those who will be supported can fix other problems by themselves? The first problem we realized was access to education. So we started as a youth-led club, and then later we registered as a community-based organization, a CBO. And today we are registered as an NGO in Uganda. And we are primarily focusing on providing access to quality education for children and youth who have been affected by armed conflicts. And we are also supporting Ugandans who also live in similar conditions, especially those who are from rural areas. So since 2009, when we started our primary school programming, we have supported over 4,500 learners in the primary education. Majority of them have been resettled to the US and Europe. We have a big community of our alumni, the primary school, former students from our school. And in 2008, 1 year before our primary school started, we did a tutoring program for us who had access to quality education in towns outside the refugee settlement. We were very good at physics, mathematics, chemistry, biology, those subjects which appear to be difficult for people who don't have good exposure to good teachers, good laboratories, or those who do not have time to study in the night because they don't have electricity. So we came back to our communities to do tutoring for primary 6 and 7 children, senior 1 to senior 3 students in the refugee settlements to ensure that we build their capacity to do well at the national exams. So in 2007, we had 52 students who excelled in the primary living examination. We had nowhere to take them because there was only one secondary school at the extreme end of the refugee settlement. So we knew having access to secondary school as a student, traveling about 10 kilometers from your home to school and back, that was quite difficult. For example, girls could not make it because there are so many disruptions. Even under similar conditions for both boys and the girls, a girl is more likely to drop out compared to a boy. If you are working from home, you don't have food, you know you will not eat lunch, you don't have any means of transport.
Security also.
Yes, security, and you know in places where there are many people, if you are an adolescent girl or a bit older, there are some disruptions of boys or men along the way. So it was quite difficult. We sat down with the religious leaders. We worked with a number of community leaders to discuss problems and solutions. The best solution was to mobilize refugees to contribute food. At that time, refugees were doing farming, so we collected the maize and beans. We were able to load the food on the trucks and went to schools in town where we had the partnerships with Ugandan head teachers in secondary schools to accept the 30 students we selected from 52 who were tutored and excelled in the national exams. So that year in 2008, our secondary school scholarship program started. We did not have enough money to pay for their school fees for the whole year, but we promised that we were going to pay.
Your organization has developed over the years, has expanded. You've had different partnerships, including with Street Child. This came a little later in 2019. How did that partnership come about initially with Street Child? Tell me about that.
Okay, I remember some of the challenges we have been facing as a refugee-led organization. It is capacity in different areas. So our partnership with the Street Child in 2019 started when we attended a workshop of refugee-led organizations in Uganda. We are part of the Relon network in Uganda. So we got in touch with Ellen. I think Ellen was working with the Street Child Uganda then. So we identified key areas where we could be supported by an international organization like Street Child. So we needed the capacity in terms of program design, monitoring and evaluation of our programs, finance, and also safeguarding and child protection, because we are dealing with children who are also victims of wars. We were also supported in fundraising. I remember Street Child Uganda inviting a number of volunteers from the UK program to Uganda who were attached to our programs to provide support in different areas. Later, we wanted to bring secondary education to refugees. Instead of taking refugee students outside the refugee settlement to town, which we had done for a number of years, it was more expensive and quite difficult to monitor because those students were living in public or private schools. We have a leadership and entrepreneurship program which encourages students to give back to their communities, which we could not implement because we did not have a school. So there were more motivations to build a school. So Street Child in 2020, we worked together to design a low-cost secondary school, whose construction started in November 2021, and the catalyst funding came from Street Child UK. So the secondary school began with the Senior 1, Senior 2, and the Senior 3. We already had some students who were going to town. We brought them back to the refugee settlement to begin with them. And as I speak right now, this is the second year, we have 371 students. 43% of these students are girls, and then 57 are boys. So we still have challenges making sure that both girls and the boys have equal access to education. We're actually doing very well in this area, much as you see that the number of boys is still more. But compared to other schools within the refugee settlement or in the area, we have done more of girl-child education because of the partnership we have with the Street Child.
You've also got a program running called Breaking Barriers, which involves the education of young girls and keeping them in school, ensuring that they have the option of staying in school. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, so we are running that program in primary schools, 3 primary schools in Tiangwala refugee settlement. So to give you a picture of how enrollment is in primary education, when you have nursery section, like in kindergarten, there are 3 classes, baby, middle, and the top. You see so many children enrolled. The higher you go, like if you go to primary 1, primary 2, up to primary 7, the number goes on reducing.
How old is primary 7?
Primary 7, it's about 12, 13 years.
Okay.
So in kindergarten, we start with kids who are 3 years, 4. So the numbers of those kids are many. And the girls are usually more than the boys in terms of enrollment. But when you go up, you find that more girls are dropping out. So this project is supporting us to keep girls who are at the risk of dropping out in the primary school, to make sure that we bridge the gaps they have by supporting them, those who are lagging, especially before the normal classes begin and after classes, so that we can be able to group them in different classes. We support them, and then once they do well, they continue with their mainstream education. And we are not stopping them from attending the mainstream education, only that we are providing extra support to these girls who are struggling in school. So the results are great. We have seen more attendance, because at the first it was difficult for them to come very early in the morning, but evening classes are attended in large numbers. And we are also seeing more progress in numeracy and literacy, like their capacity to read and also understand the numbers has improved over time. So we are supporting hundreds of students in the 3 schools.
One thing that's hugely important to Street Child, and I think they're pretty good at it, is localization and joining with organizations that work closely with communities. How important is that for your organization, that you have the partnership of someone who cares, really cares, that you can work with your communities for the long term rather than just a quick fix?
Yes, thank you so much. I think localization is something that we needed way, way back. I wish it started a long time ago. Because if you are an international organization coming from UK or from the US or wherever, your presence in the community somewhere in Africa may be for a short time. But building the capacity of local organization is key to sustainability. And the Street Child has done very well in this area. For example, very few organizations have done it. I don't remember any organization that has been able to come on the ground and interact with us, showing us how they do their businesses in the UK, so that we can also be able to do the same. And most organizations behave like they have what they don't have to give you so that you become a competitor. That's how we have thought that maybe some people think, because the transfer of knowledge and skills from Street Child to local partners in Uganda has benefited us a lot. For example, we have worked on fundraising. From 2019, when our partnership started, we have seen more than 50% increase because our budget more than doubled since 2019. 2020 we had more funding coming from other donors because of the skills we had acquired. We have received trainings in finance, monitoring and evaluation, program design, basically building systems which are sustainable by our own people, not relying on people who may be seated in UK who cannot easily be flown to Uganda to help us to solve our problems. And through the same partnership, we have also been able to see the people we serve increasing. The numbers of the people we serve has increased. For example, in 2019, we were about 500 students in primary school. Now we have 934. And in 2021, we also supported 2,000 plus other students in 6 other primary schools. Before we had the capacity built, we could not be able to do so. And then if you look at the fundraising part of it, we have built a number of classrooms for secondary school. We have dormitories, it's a boarding and day school. We have science laboratories. The school is fenced. We also have other programs which are supporting parents who have children in school. It is on the side of livelihood where we are targeting parents who have children who have dropped out of school because their income is not good.
Yeah.
So all those areas where Street Child supported us have seen great improvement.
It's building community.
Yes.
That's important to your organization also.
Yes, so we have called that project Family Business for Education. For example, with the Street Child, we had 2 cohorts. The first cohort was with the 40 women. These 40 women were identified based on the number of the children they had, either in school or dropped out of school, and they were also supposed to be able to run a small business. So we supported them with the financial literacy skills, some knowledge on business planning, and then we paired them with someone who could be able to supervise them on a weekly basis. We gave them some grant of $250 US dollars. So all the families who received the money, it was non-refundable,
right.
But we made sure that they saved some money every week to encourage them to have that spirit of saving for their children in school. Children who were going to school and those who were out of school had food on the table, which was a major concern for those mothers, most of them who were widows. And some of the small problems like sanitary materials, which girls could miss and they don't go to school, were easily purchased by those mothers. School uniform or exercise books were no longer problems to those families. So those businesses they started helped them to solve other problems we could not solve immediately.
And it gives them a sense of self-worth.
Yes, you're right.
That they can do things for themselves rather than having handouts or having people do things for them.
Yes.
You live in the camp, in the settlement. Sorry, you did correct me beforehand about camp versus settlement. It is a settlement, and you live there?
Yes, I right now, because the job I do is mainly fundraising, I spend some time in the refugee settlement, and the other times I spend it outside the settlement. But I do.
How much have you seen change since you arrived there as an 11-year-old boy?
Oh, there is so much change. In terms of like service delivery, there is a lot of changes because I think there have been reforms in the humanitarian world because of a number of reasons. From the time I arrived, the interaction between international organizations and refugees, or even national organizations, it wasn't like so close. I remember we were not accessing offices as refugees easily as compared to what it is today. So, and also services were not enough compared to today. We have UNHCR offices within the refugee settlements, and most international organizations also have offices within the refugee settlements. In the past, they had the offices in the nearby town and drove to the refugee camp the following morning to work. At the end of the day, they used to park and go back to town. So understanding of refugees' problems was limited because I'm not saying to understand the refugees, you must live there, but if you are implementing, you need to understand more of these problems compared to someone who is giving money like a donor. A donor doesn't need to be in the refugee camp settlement to give, but you who is implementing projects, you need to understand people's problems and definitely involve them in designing those projects.
The world now has millions and millions of refugees. How important is it for you? You call yourself a refugee.
Yes.
Still today. You're proud to be a refugee from everything that you've accomplished. It's incredible. There is definitely a negative connotation surrounding refugees wherever you are in the world, that you're a refugee. How do you want that narrative to change? And how do we do it? Can I ask you that? Or is that another podcast?
Yeah, I think right now, I don't regret calling myself a refugee because the Bible, if you believe in the Bible or not, it says that even Jesus was a refugee. So it's not like refugees are useless people. No.
Really not.
Anyone is a potential refugee as we speak because there are so many problems around the world, very many uncertainties. A refugee is anyone who loses their home and cross the border into another country for safety. It could be for political reasons or any other reason, but the moment you are not willing to leave your country, but you are forced to leave, you become a refugee. So you may be a professor, you may be anyone important in your country. The moment you cross that country seeking for asylum, you become a refugee. So that name is not a problem to me anymore, but I know so many people are stigmatized by that name, and very many people, when they hear about a refugee, they immediately think about being a dependent. Maybe you're running away from trouble, you're coming to cause more trouble where I am. No, I think it's not a good way of looking at refugees. Refugees have skills. Refugees can innovate. Refugees can think like any other person. What refugees don't have are opportunities, like maybe if you leave your country, you no longer have access to a job, so you cannot be able to pay for a service. You can't have access to good medical care, or you cannot have, maybe you can't go to a nice restaurant because you don't have the money. But if refugees are given those opportunities, they are like people like any other person. So I think it is very important for each one of us to look at refugees in a positive way. When I was in the US, I remember when I was working at this Japanese company, my colleague at work, had a presentation on a radio station. It was about refugees. And he came to me, he said, he used it to call me TK. He said, TK, how are you doing today? I said, I'm fine. He told me, do you have any idea about refugees? I have this difficult topic about refugees, but I don't know what to say because I know these are crazy people and some of them come from the Middle East to think this like association with terrorism. He didn't know that he was speaking to a refugee. So because at work I reported on time, I did every overtime that my supervisor gave me. I even asked for more overtime. I even worked on Saturday and Sunday when other people were not, when I was not supposed to work. So he thought that a refugee cannot behave like that. And of course, I was hard working. I was supposed to train for 6 months. I trained for 2 months on the amount of work they gave me to train for 6 months because I knew what I wanted. So I told him, I gave him some tips, and finally I told him, why do you have a negative view about refugees? Do you want to know who refugees are? He said, yes, I need to understand and maybe give positive comments. I said, this one,
you're looking
here,
at one.
me, is a refugee.
What was his response?
So he got shocked, like he couldn't speak for a second. So he changed. It changed him. So he realized that refugees are like any other person. I had seen many Americans come to work like today and then get fired like maybe after 2 days. So we need to change our mindset. It's about the mindset. And maybe what people fear is that if many people come into our countries, we will lose our jobs. That is common. I don't think it is easy to take that away because everyone may have fear for their livelihood. But because we are living in a situation where we don't know who will be where in the next few years, you never know. Me who is thinking that these are refugees, I may go to their country next year or the other year. So we need to take it positively.
Ntakamaze Nziyonvira, thank you for talking to me.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.